All right, what is up, you heathens and demons, you beautiful, blasphemous people? Welcome back to A Raging Atheist. We are going to have a really good conversation tonight. Here in a minute, I'm going to throw it over to Ali, who is moderating and is going to help me delve into Richard's ideology and his belief system. Richard's been doing some really good streams. I was supposed to put his link in the description below, but I was running behind. So I will get that link in the description below. If you haven't seen the streams he's been doing, you should go check them out. Did a recent stream with Jill, did a recent stream with Sky. We're going to talk about them a little bit. First, got to say what's up to all the Christian trolls up in the house. And I say trolls lovingly, Nephilim free. What up? Who else was the other one? Cheddar Man. What up, Cheddar Man? And of course, everybody's favorite messenger is up in the chat. What's up, everybody? We're going to have a good show tonight. I have been lining up appearances. So next Tuesday, I will be on In Time with Nicholas Suter and Angsgar Odinson. Should be a really good show. I'm looking forward to that. We're going to be talking about some of my past and some of the things that I've overcome in my past. September 19th, I'll be filming with the Utah Outcasts. I'm looking forward to that. That's going to be a great thing. Raging Atheist will be on their channel all week. So that will be something to look forward to. And then on October 28th, I'll be doing my deconversion story with Neil, the 604 Atheist. If you haven't seen the stream with Neil the other night, it was a good stream. Go check it out. And with that, I'm going to toss it over to Ali, and we're going to delve into Richard Madsen's beliefs. So I want to talk some aliens tonight. What's up? What's up, Ali?
Hey, Nog, thanks for inviting me. Looks like you and I are both doing back-to-back streams tonight. We've got another one at 10 p.m. PST, 1 a.m. EST. So that's going to be with That Christian Vlogger, or formerly That Christian Vlogger. I think he goes by his actual name now. So that's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, he goes by J. Co now.
Yes, J. Co. And Richard, I have been looking forward to finally getting to chat with you because we've had you on a few different panels and you've also come to a couple of live shows. So I guess let's start off with the basics of your belief structure around the Bible, and then we can kind of work our way out from there. You have some pretty interesting ideas around the Bible being, if I recall correctly, cyclical history or history of the future that's sort of been sent to us. Do you have any comments on that? Do you want to expand on that?
Peace and respect to you all. Welcome, everyone. Welcome in the side chat. Thanks for showing up, everybody that showed up in support of me trying to do this. Tonight, I'm just going to try to be just really honest. I don't have any kind of script. I'm just going to talk from the hip and do my best to answer anything you guys say. And I don't even want to lead the conversation. I just want to serve you and answer what I can for you. Okay. So when I consider things like the special promises made to the hero of the story, especially in Christianity, it's very well defined, over the general promises to the population, I see that there are specific ones, and those specific ones are already being enjoyed by the 24 elders in the throne room of God. That is, they're already enjoying the special promises to the Christ. Now, the Bible also simultaneously says that this earth will only have one Christ.
Can we slow down a little bit? So can you talk about what those special promises are and where you get that from Scripture, and also who those 24 elders are and where that comes from in Scripture?
Okay, so the 24 elders, I'm going to answer it backwards. The 24 elders in the throne room of heaven is chapter 4 of the book of Revelation. They're additionally given greater detail in chapter 21 of the book of Revelation for anyone who wants to look that up. People would easily recall the scene, the 24 elders, the 4 beasts around God's throne, the one who sits on God's throne. So that's where I get the 24 elders from. That's what I'm referencing right now. The special promises to Christ are throughout. So I can't tell you one chapter and verse where it says, and Christ will have these special promises. They're throughout. It's very heavy in the promises in the book of Revelation, including being crowned, sitting in a throne at God's side. So those are 3 of the special promises.
Okay. So I'll let you continue from there. I just wanted to make sure for anybody who's not as familiar with pieces of this that you were, being fairly clear about where these things are coming from and what they are.
And I said that I say not just in the Bible. If a person were to find the red star kachina, like some of the older expressions of that costume for the Zuni, not Hopi, Zuni Indian, you're going to find the red star kachina, which is also the same as chapter 4 of the book of Revelation. If you look into the alabaster flautist woman in Japanese art with the red god behind her, you're going to find he has a headdress that is exactly those same coloration, count, comparative sizes. If you look into Hinduism, you're going to find the great red god who hugs the earth, and you're going to see it again, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It just kind of never stops, actually.
Okay, sorry, it took me a sec to find my way back to my mouse. I was getting distracted by the chat for a second. People talking about one of my favorite movie franchises. So I was actually curious. You're talking, like, I asked you specifically about where you felt, you and I have talked in the past, like, personally. And you talked about how you felt that the Bible was a discussion of history, but history that is to be repeated. And I'm curious, like, what you meant by that.
Right. I forgot that part. Sorry. Okay. So, and we have a little bit of evidence to this, although we can't see life forms living on the exoplanets that we refer to as Goldilocks planets. And I don't mean just those in the Goldilocks zone, but I mean the ones that have a star that they pass in front of. And we can only see these within our close proximity in astronomical terms. That if a light shines through an atmosphere around a planet, we can break that up prismatically. And that will expose Fraunhofer lines. And those Fraunhofer lines are very much like a barcode on a package, showing the kinds of gases that are in that atmosphere. So we find gases on exoplanets that we're calling Goldilocks planets. And those gases would necessitate things like living plants, because those gases cannot exist otherwise, as far as we know. So we think there's living plants on some other planets. Well, in the Christian view, or I think maybe in any theistic or deistic view, the occurrence of that is extremely unlikely and probably involved interference by some higher being. So it's my belief that God does not own just this earth, the one that I would call God. Other people have other names, Yahweh, etc. Owns more than just this one planet, and that would be purposeful, and that purpose would be to have a batch of us on that planet at some point. But that would also necessitate that human nature being what it is, they would develop in technology. They would become less and less religious the more they knew about science. They would eventually get to a point where they're going to kill themselves off and need rescued. And then at that point, their ancestry, whom I would call angels, God, etc., would come rescue them. But they needed a hero. But because they needed a hero, God would then pick someone from that planet, enlighten them first, thereby making them Thor, Buddha, etc., Christ. And that person would become what a Christian would call Christ for that planet. But there's been more than one planet. And from what I can tell, there's been at least, and I can't say conclusively, but at least 23 before this planet.
Where do you get that number from?
24 elders.
So you think the elders around God in Revelations represents the livable planets that God created?
There were livable planets that God created, and then he conducted end times and destroyed the planet and brought the people off of it simultaneously.
So, all right. So you think so we would be the 24th? Like
we would be the 24th at least. I can't definitively say. But if there's a new heaven, and that new heaven is unoccupied, which is what the text says, that Christ will be the first one to enter into his heaven, and everyone else that has claim to him and claim to that heaven will follow him into it. That pretty much makes it, I don't know, remote controlled right now or something. And there's nobody living in it. So there's one that's vacant of the 24 and 23 occupied.
Well, I'm a little confused. I wanted to go a little bit back, unless Naka, you want to pursue this particular line, because there's kind of an issue that I take a few steps back with something that you said, a Christ or a Buddha. Do you consider Jesus Christ and Buddha to be the same person? Or to
Yes,
be
the
even
same
similar in their
actual
views?
singular fleshly person, the same singular person.
How does that work?
How does it work? Well, because we have different cultures around the earth, we need different explanations for the same thing. So the way that he's represented to those people is in the story of Buddha. The way he was represented to some other people, say there's a Native American tribe that calls him the gentle spirit. He just came out of the wilderness and taught them. To the Christian, they would call that Jesus.
So you think that the same singular fleshly person was somehow in like the Americas and in Europe and in Asia
No,
all at the same time?
I think
You're
I
right
think
that
that
you're
he
pointing
thinks
out a
they're.
time frame problem. You're
Yeah,
right.
I think that he thinks that they're all reincarnations of the same, so they didn't exist at the same time, but they're the same spirit, right?
No, sir. No, sir. No, I'm saying it's a singular flesh person who does the job. It just is described in slightly different ways for different cultures. Okay, so if I go to the Bible and Christians were really going to buck me on this one, like I haven't already said something that was controversial, but if you look at the description of Christ, he's called things like the two olive branches, the God man, the two this, the two that. And then in the book of Revelation, there's the story of the two witnesses. But the two witnesses do very specific things. First of all, they have power over the plagues. God takes their opinion as to whether or not a man's or woman's spirit should be elevated to heaven or damned to hell. They are killed. They lie dead 3.5 days exactly. And it says exactly 3.5 days, just like it does for the story of Jesus. And then they're resurrected from the dead and they testify more. Well, there's only one in all of the Bible, and any Christian will tell you only Christ does it. Well, the description of Christ is in the book of Revelation called the two witnesses. So I believe that Christ has not done his job, which is why there's no physical evidence and no historicity for the occurrence. It hasn't happened.
So how do you account for the vast differences in character? So like the Buddhist was very passive, Jesus was fairly aggressive, I would say.
Well, what if I asked you what a hero should look like according to you, and then I ask a Laokai?
But see, the question isn't
Would there
about
be a
what a hero
difference
should look
between your
like.
two
It's
stories?
like if you want to like say that they're the same person,
Mm-hmm.
then how would you describe the changes in character? Like for me personally, like I don't even think the Jesus in the Bible describe the same person. If you look at Revelations, the Jesus of Revelations is very different than the Jesus of the Gospels. Two very different personalities. I conclude that
Mm-hmm.
they're not the same being if they have different personalities. So how do you account for the fact that the Buddha was very passive? I mean, shit, he slept under a tree for what 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
To where Jesus was very active against Judaism of his time.
Well, I think that's just like the four Gospels being conflicting. It is not a problem that there is some, I don't know, how do you put that? Some artistic leeway in the actor. And there are 23 that have happened so far. So which one are we talking about? And what were the subtle nuances of the personality of that individual? We could discuss that and hypothesize about that all day long.
Well,
Here's
that would be my evidence against your theory, though.
Mm-hmm.
So if all 23 have different personalities, then they're obviously just different beings.
Oh, that's what I said. They're singular. Okay, the Earth gets developed. Use like panspermia as an example. We were planted here after it was prepared. This is the idea system, and then it develops in a very natural way. And then they get to technology, and then they're about to kill themselves off, which they're unaware they're about to do it, but they're about to do it, and they need rescued. That's when God wakes somebody up and empowers him to be the hero. So they could have greatly varied personalities as long as they follow the general script and do what's required to be done.
Here's the challenge to that, though. Like, Siddhartha Gautama, like, in terms of scholarly research, appears to be a real physical person who existed during a specific time period.
Sure.
Jesus supposedly appeared much, much earlier in terms of history. Like, scholars disagree on the exact year that he may have lived, and historical evidence for him is somewhat scarce, but it's very clear that the earliest Christian texts appear significantly before Gautama is said to exist.
No,
And-
I mean, I completely agree with you. There's huge time frame problems, and there's also evidential problems. But I don't think we can actually show an actual living human being Buddha, the original Buddha. I don't think we can show that. Yes, it's widely believed, but if you surveyed strictly Christians, then they'd say there was a real Jesus Christ. And they have lots of evidence in their opinion too.
Well, I mean, they have a couple quotes from Josephus and Paul
as secular scholars, but in their opinion, they have a lot of evidence, and they're sure it's a real person. Even Richard Carrier is fairly convinced that Jesus, or however you want to say Jesus, Ben Joseph was probably a real person.
Yahshua. Yeah, I mean, I think that if Jesus was real at all, then it was a real person, like Yahshua ben Joseph, that theory or whatever.
Well, I mean, there is some small amount of evidence that Jesus existed, but it's also obvious that he was heavily mythicized. Like, even, the oldest of the accounts of his existence has virtually none of the miracles that the later accounts do.
Which I would argue, like, the myth is... So even if he existed, the mythifying of that character makes that character not exist. So say if somebody were to write about me and say that I had powers to shoot lasers out of my eyeballs. Well, it's not true. They just wrote it. But in 1,000 years, they all thought that, Nakatsuchi could shoot lasers out of his eyeballs. It doesn't make it true. It just means that, people wrote about it.
And not to shut down the conversation. I'm enjoying the conversation. I think you guys are doing an excellent job, and I'm doing the best I can. Mainly what I just try to do is stay in prayer about these things and try to be honest. I'm not horribly concerned, even if everyone just says, "Oh, that guy's crazy," and whatever else, because
I don't think your ideas are any crazier than anybody else's.
Thank you, Naka. When the stuff actually happens, this will be that past thing that you just referred to. People can say whatever they want. They can believe what they want. They can make up stories if they want. It won't matter.
Yeah, but I mean, my point is this though, like somebody did write a whole bunch of shit about me being able to shoot lasers out of my eyeballs. In 1,000 years, the people that believe that version of Nakatsuchi that could shoot laser out of his eyeballs, even I can't. So, that version of me never existed. You see what I'm saying? Like, so if Jesus really did exist, he was a normal dude. Like that's my belief. I understand Christians think otherwise.
I mean, you don't think that I'm agreeing with Christian doctrine, do you?
Oh no, not at all. I'm just more explaining my position.
Oh no, I totally agree with you. Actually, I'm not a believer in magic and things that are not plausible in physics. I don't believe in those.
And that's the one thing that.
But that's not the story. That's not the story that's being told in the Bible. That's a doctrinal view held by Christians.
Yeah. I was just because me and you talked about that before. I'm not trying to put that on you. It's just
no.
I get in a lot of trouble when I say that I'm a mythicist, and they're like, why do you think that Jesus was a myth? Like, because even though I grant that there probably was a guy at the root of that myth, the myth is mythicizing that figure in turn changes the figure from the reality to the fiction. So of course, like you said, I don't believe in the supernatural. I haven't seen any evidence for it. I don't take away from people that do, because I haven't seen any evidence against it either. But
I'd love to show you the evidence you already have sometime or another.
Well, yeah, I don't believe that a dude can walk on water. So those stories, those myths are obviously not true. And yet people think that they're true. And so they give credence to this Jesus character based on stories that obviously just aren't true. They're myths that, his followers at the time really try to blow up his character.
I don't think that's actually the
So-
case, Malka. I think that's not exactly. In fact, I think it's not at all what they're talking about. For
Guys,
instance,
can I cut in just a little bit? You've had the super chat that we have from
Yeah, I've been meaning to get to it
Sarah
for a
up
minute.
there, so I wanted to, before we get too much deeper into this particular can of worms, I wanted to give Sarah the chance for her question to be asked, and I wanted to explain, if Richard didn't know the term, what the demiurge is.
well, go ahead
so-
because I don't.
So the demiurge is actually a Platonic concept. Effectively, the demiurge is a deity which creates. It's the deity that created the universe, effectively.
Mm-hmm. So it's like a deistic belief?
Technically, in a way, Platonism is confusing. I'd have to get fairly deep into the present but unmoved by humans concept to get too far into it. But effectively,
Okay.
yes, the demiurge is an entity that created the universe and then did nothing else after that. Effectively.
Okay. Well, Sarah and or Stupid Horror Energy and or Sarah Pease herself. No, I don't. I don't think so. In fact, I don't see in any religion around this planet, other than the doctrinal view of the religion, where Yahweh or any other God claims to have created all things, but only claims to have created all things that are good for us. So in context, all things doesn't mean all things total. It would only mean all things we can see from here that matter to us directly.
So you believe that God created life on the planet, but didn't necessarily have to create the planet itself?
Right. He says he arrived here and the planet was void. Like Mars.
Yeah, but it also says that light existed before the sun did.
Would you like me to give you a plausible explanation for that, or would you like to move on? I will.
If you would like to.
Okay, so in electric universe theory versus gravitational collapse disk theory, you end up with the redirection of energy through space, which automatically and by itself starts collecting gases and dust particles and starts organizing them by their physical aspects, like the periodic table, which is why you'd have separations. You'd find different concentrations in different areas within that plasma stream. And the first thing it does when it collects enough materials is they start glowing because they're ionized via thus light before a sun by necessity.
That's a really interesting theory, though there is, as far as I understand it, isn't there evidence that the Earth formed significantly after the sun started to form?
Well, you didn't even ask me that.
Like in terms of physics.
Right.
So how could, if God found the planet, how could he have created the sun?
That's a great question. I don't know. Maybe I haven't
Later.
had time to pray on that, and I'm just going to throw something out there. It was a rogue planet. He moved it here. I don't know.
Oh, Nephie's still here. Say what's up, Nephilim Free. Richard. Nephilim Free really seems to have it in for you. Like he's done nothing but
does,
talk
and
shit
that's-
about you.
That's okay. He's entitled to his opinions.
So, yeah, apparently Sarah says that there's a particular conceptualization of the demiurge within Gnostic Christianity, which I'm actually not that familiar with that version of the demiurge. I'm only familiar with Plato's demiurge and some of the later Greek philosophers that talked about it. So my apologies if I gave you an inadequate explanation.
Well, sometime during this stream, I'm going to give out my email, and she can describe more her question. I'd be happy to address it personally as accurately as I can.
Somebody asked earlier, Immutable Destiny asked whether or not Jesus could have been an amalgamation of a number of different figures from mythology that sort of added up to a Jewish messianic figure, which my answer to that is not necessarily in the way the stories are written. I don't think that they match up to, Jesus himself matches up to the figure that is predicted in the Old Testament. The Old Testament describes a very warlike figure, somebody who's going to get on the battlefield and lead, the Jewish folks back to the Promised Land, which I know is very Zionist, but if you look at the text, that's very much what it appears to be. And that's part of the reason why a large percentage of Jewish folks rejected Jesus as being the Messiah, because he didn't fit that conceptualization, which was very much the historical one at the time. I'm curious what your opinion is.
Well, Digital Hammurabi just did a video Megan Lewis just did a video on the difference between plagiarism and I can't remember the other word. Taking from other materials, and it would be socially acceptable. But I think generally in his question, the answer is there'd be no apparent difference, no difference in appearance between what he just described and what I just described. That if it's the same individual described differently to different people as they need it, it would look just like that. So I would have to agree with him. It certainly looks like that.
Yeah, see, with you, Richard, it's always trying to process while stay on my feet and ask questions, because you do have such a different
I'd actually like to say something about that.
interpretation of things. Oh yeah, go for it, please.
I barely graduated high school. In fact, I had to go to summer school. I haven't been to seminary. I've not watched YouTube videos, read books. I was an anti-theist for 30 years, and being mindful can back up that statement. I was an anti-theist for 30 years. She knows that. And I mean, I was making the positive claim there cannot be a God. Okay. And I'm only 7 years old now. And every time I go and look up one of these Hebrew words that I don't know Hebrew, but every time I go and look up these definitions of these words, they not only fit into the context that I think they belong in, they fit. I'm having trouble figuring out how they wrote the Bible the way they did. Like, where'd they get this crazy story from? I don't even know how they got it.
I often wonder the same thing, but I could see where you would have issues, because I think most Christians actually interpret it wrong because they go based upon the interpretations that they've been told instead of reading it themselves and coming to their own conclusions. They trust the preacher they've had their entire lives, whatever preacher that is. I don't think it's usually the same preacher. I do know, like, I have family members that are in the church, and they tend to travel a lot. From this church to the next I think they've been settled for quite a while now, but I don't think that I think that most Christians grow up being told a thing, and then they read that Bible and are able to fit that Bible into what they've been told their entire lives.
Sure,
well,
absolutely.
I think one of the challenging things, though, is that the Bible is, and Digital Hammurabi talks about this too. So I'm going to reference them a little bit in one of the streams of theirs that I watched, or what, I don't know if it was a stream or just a video. They did a collaborative with Telltale at one point, and I think it was that one where they referenced this. They talked about there's a bunch of different, like, genres of writing that existed in ancient times, and I think they were referring to cuneiform, but you can find this in ancient Hebrew as well. When you examine ancient texts, there are a number of genres that are, to an ancient reader, you could immediately recognize them for what they were, in the same way that when you pick up a romance novel, you can tell it's a romance novel. You pick up a sci-fi novel, you can tell it's a sci-fi novel. Well, there were entire genres of writing that don't exist anymore, or that only had cultural relevance, that it's very difficult to tell what any particular piece of writing or even a particular section of writing is. These books were never originally meant to be assembled as a single manuscript. They were written across vastly different time periods, and they were stuck together during the Council of Nicaea, because Christians were arguing over which were doctrinal texts and which were not, and the Roman Emperor, the Roman Empire needed somebody to put their foot down and be like, no, this is what the official thing is, because there were laws at the time that made it illegal to be anything other than a Christian, so they needed to define Christianity. And so, like, when you look at that, it's very difficult for somebody reading sometimes a translation of a translation, in the case of, say, the King James Bible, which was, if I recall correctly, a translation of the Greek, which included the Old Testament being in Greek.
It wasn't even that direct, actually. It actually went to German, then French, then English. And that's exactly why I went to
the point is it's a translation of a translation of a translation. So yes, you're like correct. Dealing with so many levels of interpretation. When you go back to the ancient Hebrew, you go back to the ancient Greek. Like, I'm learning ancient Greek now to study some of my own myths and some of the ancient poetry, like, that comes from my tradition. And it is shocking, even when you're just studying philosophy, the sheer numbers of footnotes in really good translations just talking about all the different ways that individual words were used. And Hebrew is even more challenging, because there were no vowels.
No, I wrote an entire paper on this, and I've had a discussion with Dr. Josh where he pretty much laughed away the idea, but I'm going to still stand by it, and I'm going to stand by it firm, because I think Dr. Josh, like everybody else, fucking phones. I turned my phone off, I promise. But like everybody else, I think Dr. Josh is stuck inside what he's always been told. So I broached the idea, like, if you read just the four Gospels, not the rest of it, just the four Gospels. If you read it with an open mind, if you go into it, you put away everything that you've ever been told about what those Gospels say, and you read them fresh. They read a lot like an alien abduction story, a modern alien abduction story. I mean, it reads a lot like that. It reads to me like aliens were visiting these people 2,000 years ago. This special person was born based upon this alien DNA. I mean, this is how it reads to me. And Dr. Josh kind of laughed it off. But I mean, I wrote an entire paper. I found 92 passages in the Gospels alone that could be referring to UFO activity, what we would call UFO activity today.
Oh, sure. That's actually nothing I've studied, but right now I have to agree with you that it's not talking about magic. It's talking about high technology.
Exactly. Like when Satan takes Jesus up into the mountain and shows him every kingdom of the world, that reads to me like he literally took Jesus into a place of high technology, showed him TV screens with video feeds to every kingdom in the world. I mean, that's how
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, that's how it reads to me. This one mountain is referred to specifically. Jesus defeats Satan there. Jesus goes back many times. He's able to call his disciples from the top of this mountain. Wherever they're at in Israel, he's able to call to them. It seems to me like he has very modern technology. You can only pick that up, though, if you read the Gospels, putting away all the context that you had been told your entire life. Had I not put away my religion for 10 years and picked that Bible up again and read it, I would have never even found that shit.
If you think about it, it looks like the mountain is following him.
Hey, we've got Ragnar in the house.
I'm not saying that I believe that the Gospels are an alien abduction story. I'm saying they read like one. Very different things.
Nothing. I think there's a very good reason for that. Go ahead, Alec. I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, number one, Dragnot's in the house. Number two, thank you, Tony Designs, for shilling out Callan and and the SNS Crew's channel.
Yeah, what's up, Dragnot? Give Nephilim some help for me.
So what's really interesting about the New Testament in particular, though, is just what a hodgepodge of things it actually is, right? You've got the four Gospels, which were written late enough they could not have been, at least the oldest copies we have, could not have been possibly written by the people that they're ascribed to. Or if they did, they were on their deathbed when they did it. And a few of them, if I recall correctly, it could not have been possible. And the oldest of them has the least miraculous things in it, versus the newer ones seem to almost build on each other. And then you have the letters of Paul, and then out of nowhere you've got the book of Revelation, which came significantly later, if I recall correctly. So I'm curious, since you have, since you kind of understand the historical context of how the Bible was assembled, why is it that you think it is telling one continuous story, given the political motivations for assembling it the way that the council did, and other sort of circumstances that would lead one to believe that it came together for a very different reason than to try to tell humanity that there's some sort of future thing we need to escape?
Aliyah, I think that you will agree with me that if I said that West Virginia represents all of the United States, that's inaccurate. So to say the King James represents and I know we don't have signature texts, to say that King James represents the text is also just as inaccurate. Of course, there's other Bibles that are more direct, that are just as available as the King James today.
But I wasn't talking about the King James. I was talking about the Council of Nicaea assembling the Bible in the first place.
Okay, so when they assembled it, what did they produce?
Well, they produced, if I recall correctly, what became the Catholic Bible. And then later on, Martin Luther had issues with that, and what many of us know as the so-called Christian Bible or the Evangelical Bible came out of that. Okay,
so the Catholic canon Bible is what they produced. So,
correct.
So if we refer to that, it's no representation of all of the entire work, or else the Council of Nicaea did nothing. Okay, but other editions are available, which is exactly the reason that I have a 1537 Matthews, because it's a direct translation done by two people who were killed by the king of the country at the time, and one escaped. Okay, so I mean, they literally gave their lives to do this, and they were well aware that that's what they were doing. And I know that's an appeal to emotion, but just the same, it's a true fact of history. So I'm not reading the Catholic canon, and in fact, I understand that there are many apocryphal books that do not belong, that are simply just books about a war god, that are not even part of the storyline, that are contained within the Catholic canon, such as the books of Maccabees. So I'm really not even talking about the Catholic canon at all.
No, yeah, I stepped away to check on my daughter, so I'm just going to interject real quick, and then I'll let you guys continue, and I'll catch up and pipe in. Nephi, I'm not afraid of you. Like, I'm not going to just go up on your channel. You did offer me to come up on your channel, and I've heard stories. Come on my channel, I'll go on yours. Nobody's afraid of you. I mean, you read from a script like everybody else. But go ahead.
Well, I mean, Nephilim was going to actually have a debate with me about whether or not this story of Heracles was derivative of the story of Samson, but I guess some sort of falling out happened, and that ended up not happening.
Now, Heracles, I would say Hercules, right?
Well, Hercules is the Romanization of the name. Heracles, or Heracles, is the Greek.
Okay.
So it's the older of the two names, in other words.
Thank you.
Yeah, see, I always, when I studied those guys, I always studied the Greek version. So, like, the Roman versions always throw me off. But so I'm not sure what you guys were talking about. If you want to get back into that, we can. I know I definitely want to go into your view of God himself, and whether or not he's biological. But I'm not sure. Like I said, I did step away to go check on my daughter, make sure she did her shot, and she was in bed, and she wasn't in bed. She was on her phone. So yeah, I had to take care of that. But so if you guys want to continue that, whatever line of conversation you were having, please feel free to go for it. And then once you're done with that, then we can switch over to the biology of God.
Honestly, this seems like a natural transitioning point. So if we want to continue that, I was just talking about the circumstances under which the Bible as we know it now came to be, and sort of how that plays around with what Richard was saying about it. But I think this is a natural transition
about it.
Sure, go ahead.
Because I am actually fascinated in that conversation as well. It's something that I've been studying a lot lately.
I would like to comment just briefly on that before we move on. Thank you. So I think what actually happened is, for those who had a written language, a literal, already written on paper was given to them. For those who didn't have written languages, such as the Zuni, Hopi, etc., many Native American tribes didn't have a written language. They were working mostly in pictographs. The people, the messengers, showed up and are recalled as being about twice the height of the people. That is, I would say, something akin to fully evolved, if you could put it that way, if I could be forgiven of using that expression. And they dressed in costumes, and the costumes were the story, which is why I spoke before about the Red Star Kachina being chapter 4 of the book of Revelation. It's a costume, and there's a dance that goes with it, and it's the most important Kachina, but it doesn't show up first. It's in a line of series. And if you look at that series, it's the same as the announcing miracles in the Bible. It's the same series. So I don't believe that man was inspired by God to write any spiritual text anywhere. I think that's bullcrap. I think it'd be impossible. I think it'd be more than a life's work to write the Pentateuch. So I don't think that's what happened. I think that we were literally, physically visited, handed the stories, sometimes in costume, and a story was told about their origin, and we are still retelling that same origin story.
All right. I mean, that's interesting. So like, if God exists, would the inspiration these human beings had, could that have come from God to be put into these holy books? Like, I don't
Well,
believe that
Richard
there's
said
much
that-
significance, but like
Richard said that he doesn't think that anybody was inspired to write it. He thinks that people were handed it already written that had
yeah, so
written
that's
languages.
clarification. I must have missed that part. So
Sorry.
And the people
So
that
what are
didn't, that
those
the messengers
original-
showed up and taught them. But my question for that though is, what of the native tribes that did have written languages that never produced any story anywhere close to similar to the Bible in any way, shape, or form? I'm thinking particularly Aztecs and Mayans and the Cherokee.
Well, I don't know. I'm only 7 years old. I don't know all of those religion or lack of religion expressions or lack of expressions that you just mentioned. Okay. But everywhere that I have looked, I have found this story.
Take care, Russ.
all right, so
So what is the story that you feel you found?
We are genetically restricted aliens, which is why we don't fit in here. Our alien ancestors who go back, I don't know, more than the approximated age of the universe itself at present. And that's how long they've been doing this. Know what we're going to do because they already seen it 1,000 times or at least 23 times. And they're going to pull our butt out of the fire at the last minute.
all right, so this is where I really wanted to go with our conversation tonight. So there was a comment in the chat about they feel like they're watching Ancient Aliens now, and this is
Make it worse.
This is a quote that I famously Matt Powell misrepresented me on. He was giving me absolutes, so I was giving a bunch of possibilities, and I talk about an obscure theory about how we actually came from the stars. There's a theory out there. I don't necessarily believe it, but this is something that you believe, and we talked about this before. So yeah, expand on that. Expand on how you think we got here, why we're here, and where we came from.
But I think it's much like if someone had come to me in my youth, when I had a woman that we got along really, really great, and we could possibly make children together, and they said, "Look, I want to give you a deserted island. And it's going to be absolutely perfect because I want there to be a perfect human society. And I think you two are the perfect people to start it. All you got to do to get this is you have to agree to not tell them about the rest of the world. You got to not tell them where you came from. That'd do it right there." I think that's how we actually started. I think that's the bottleneck that we're looking at in the genetic history of this animal. And that was the beginning of humankind at this exact form on this earth. And I think prior to that, there was no human. There were humanoid-like animals that could. I mean, I can't tell the difference between their bones and our bones myself.
Okay,
I'm not
so
that educated.
When you're talking about the genetic bottleneck, are you talking about the pan-European migration bottleneck?
You're more educated than I am. That's obvious to me.
Okay, so there's the only major genetic bottleneck that I know of in human history in terms of say overall genetic diversity is the, European migration bottleneck. Effectively, when humans left Africa and, started spreading over Europe and Asia, there was a relatively small-ish population that did that. And so, in terms of, indigenous folks pretty much from anywhere other than Africa share a lot more of their DNA than within the continent of Africa, say people on the northern part of Africa and people up the southern part of Africa do. So that's the major genetic bottleneck that I could think of in terms of human evolution. But overall, I can't think of another genetic bottleneck. So I'd like you to expand on that because that's confusing to me.
I think there might be one in the migration of Asians to America. As they were crossing the land bridge, I can't remember the name of the exact theory. It's pretty much.
You're talking about the Alaskan land bridge.
Yeah, but it's a technical name. I can't think of it now. But it's basically for about 8,000 to 10,000 years, the migrators were trapped by ice caps from the last ice age, and then they had about 10,000 years to evolve separate from everybody else and developed certain different mutations. Just can't think of it.
So Tony talks about the Toba catastrophe bottleneck, 2 to 3K people in Africa during the Bronze Age.
Yeah, and real quick, I see that Puff is in the chat. Puff, I don't have the link. So if you want to throw the link to your PayPal, anybody that can help Puff, please do so. He recently lost a family member, needs all the help he can get. So yeah, feel free to throw that in the live chat all night long, Puff. Go ahead.
Okay, so like I said, I'm only 7 years old and I barely graduated high school. And I haven't had time to research everything. I think Dragnaut would be a good one to ask. Tony Design's a good one to ask about that sort of thing. And I have to get a disclaimer in here. I do not read that in the text. Okay, so I'm hypothesizing outside of the actual text when I say I think that we were just dropped off here in pretty good sized numbers, and when we look back, we see bottlenecks, and that was our actual origination. Okay, so I'm going outside of the text, so that's eisegesis, not exegesis. So I should say that out of respect.
So looking at just doing a really cursory glance at the Toba catastrophe, which is something that I think I'd heard of once before after I read a little bit about it, but it's been a long time since I've looked into anything like that. It looked like it happened about 70,000 years ago, or 75,000 years ago, and certain people think that it may have created one of the first population bottlenecks. Do you have any commentary on that? It was the eruption of a supervolcano that caused a volcanic winter for some time.
Yeah, I have a comment on that. That must have sucked.
But I mean, the point being is that very possibly could have wiped out large percentages of the human populations and created that particular bottleneck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
meaning that seems more likely than a alien dropping us off.
I think human beings are pretty smart, and if we're looking for an answer, we're going to find it. I think we're going to even do that if the answer's not there. Now you could say the same of me, and that's fine. I could easily be doing that.
Well, I mean, there's a certain amount of confirmation bias for all of us, right? Like, we get fixated on a theory, and so then you start to see correlations everywhere. It's the reason why human brains pick images out of clouds.
Sure. Dr. Josh says you give a boy a hammer and everything's a nail.
Yeah. All right. So you think that we came here? Do you think that we came here as the Bible says, or more along the lines of evolution, like we've been here for a long time, or have we been here for only about 6,000 to 10,000 years?
I think our doctrines and understanding of these spiritual expressions is deeply flawed. I think the spiritual expressions are absolutely perfect. And I mean every jot, every tittle is absolutely perfect, but we're looking at it skewed. I'll give you an example. There are 5 days in creation. Now people go, oh, there's 7 days. No, not what I mean. 5 days in actual creation, okay? And there have been 5 earth cleansing events. I find that interesting.
Yeah, Native Americans have some lore along those lines.
That's right. They say things like this is the 5th earth. They say things like that. Yeah, that's right. Congrats. That's exactly right.
The human race has been wiped out 4 times before.
Yeah, it might be assumption that the human race was wiped out, but it's definitely true that the planet was
maybe
cleansed.
not wiped out, but devastated and having to restart. Not completely wiped out. My fault. This is the story of Buffalo Calf White Woman, or White
Buffalo Calf Woman.
I can't think tonight. Like I have a long night ahead. I've not been drinking, so I can't think. I'm drinking coffee at
so I think literally what happened is God took from genetic material in heaven of some angel or group of angels, I don't know how large or small, manipulated the DNA where what that would be created from that DNA would be diverse enough and yet restricted enough that they wouldn't quite be angels, that those actual living beings that could reproduce were produced and put in groups of, I can't tell how big, I don't know, maybe 10,000 per landmass or whatever it was, I don't know. And they were sworn to secrecy, having been raised up in heaven and delivered as adults. They were sworn to secrecy, that they wouldn't say where they come from, so that all this could happen in a very naturalistic way.
The reasoning behind that seems very strange, and also the idea that they were delivered onto different continents seems very strange when one looks at the fossil record and the archaeological record that showcases very clearly that humans migrated from Africa to other places.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
this idea that there were people placed on every single continent contradicts what we have in the historical record.
Okay, so I'm going to say again that I am postulating something that might be an explanation. I do not find it in text. I am guessing, and I'm at my wave cuffs. I'm beyond anything I can prove.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, you
Richard.
said that
I
you
think.
were you said that you wanted to be challenged on this stuff, though, and I'm letting you know
Sure.
that from the
Yeah.
archaeological and paleontological records, it's quite clear that
Sure,
humans
that's fine, but
did
Allie,
migrate.
we have to stop and say, okay, here's what I think. I think if I wanted to clear a forest full of dangerous bears, I'd send in soldiers, not grannies. Okay? So I think what happened is he sent in soldiers. Now, those soldiers were strong and resourceful and pretty darn smart, but they weren't human beings. And we call that words like Neanderthal. We call that things like Cro-Magnon. That those were the soldiers that were sent in to teach the bear to fear us. And then they got killed off. And you know who killed them off? We did. You know why we killed them off? Because they weren't us.
You want to know what's interesting, though?
That really fits the record.
That actually doesn't. There's more historical, there's more actually paleontological record that Neanderthals may have died off just because they were adapted to a particular habitat and climate, and we just outcompeted them. We actually bred with them. We got along with Neanderthals as far as history can tell.
That's how uneducated I am. Okay, so the pre-hominid, the pre-Homo sapiens sapien, I'll be specific instead of being colloquial. The pre-Homo sapiens sapien, I am saying were soldiers. They weren't Homo sapiens sapien at all. They weren't Homo sapien. They looked a lot like they were at least Homo erectus. I get that. But I think they were just sent in to be a pathfinder, to beat down a path through the forest for us. And then their time was done, and that was it, and we took over. And that may or may not have included Neanderthal as either one of those groups. I don't know. I'm not a scientist.
There are some alien theories out there about how aliens use creatures in a way that you're describing. Creatures like Sasquatch and Bigfoot.
Yahweh claims to have been born into slavery.
So I'm thinking, really, for your theory that we came here from the stars, like God brought us here and put us here to really fit with what we've learned about the world. I have to agree with Ali. I don't think that God could have dropped off humans to every continent. I think more likely he would have dropped off humans to Africa, and then we would have had the migration that we've seen out of that.
You could be completely right.
But
I'm just making a suggestion.
I'm just trying to bring out your belief system a little bit, and I know Ali's doing probably a better job of it than me. So what I'm interested in, so the ancient astronaut theory, do you think that God is biological himself? I think we've had this conversation. The painting next to you, I think that you think is a spaceship that God is pretty much going to come in.
Well, 29 separate spaceships, but yes.
All right. So you think that God is biological. So do you believe in the ancient astronaut theory that God has actually been coming, intervening in mankind and helping mankind become more civilized in the form of aliens?
Yeah, wherever they could do it gently in really small crews, like God and all of his glory never showed up here. It would have been more like contact teams, maybe 10, maybe 100 of them, maybe 1,000 of them or whatever, distributing religion to the planet when the people got, cooperative enough, big enough that they could sit down for 3 minutes during a day. Something like that.
Oh yeah, Neffy's having a whole lot of fun with these answers.
I'm sure.
But hey, at least you're honest. See, Neffy, he wouldn't be able to respond honestly to this question because even though he technically considers God to be an alien, he would never admit that.
Well, I don't want to make fun of him, but since he's coming up so much and he's being so aggressive and
he's being very aggressive. He's never in my chat, so yeah.
He sent me some nasty grams, and he's been kind of mean to me, and I've not been trying to be mean to him, but I noticed when I was discussing with him the first page of the Bible, or maybe it's the second page, that in Genesis 2, I think it's 2:5 or 2:3, it says, and every plant before it was in the earth. Talking about what stuff God had that he intended to put here. So he already had every plant before it was in the earth. Now, I'm sorry, man. Plants need like water and sunlight and minerals and stuff. Carbon dioxide, they need stuff. They can't just float around in outer space. If God owned a plant before it was planted on this planet, he had a space greenhouse or something, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, it goes to the light. Yeah, I did a video recently on Eric Hovind, and he talks about, because it obviously says the sun was made on day 4, but on day 1 there was light. So where did this
Right.
light come from?
Absolutely.
And it could have been a spaceship. So like all of these Christians believe this outrageously crazy shit, and they're gonna laugh at you for believing what they consider to be outrageously crazy shit. But I'm going to tell my audience straight up, like what Richard is saying is a lot more rational than what any of those Christians are saying. Like they think that God exists out of time, out of space, created the entire fucking universe. Out of nothing.
MR with the shade.
Yeah. Like you actually believe that there was some makeup to God that
I'd like to talk about that.
I don't know. I don't believe what you believe. Obviously, I'm an atheist. I believe in evolution. And it's not like I even believe in evolution because I wasn't there to see it. I think we have solid evidence for evolution more so than God.
Right now, you're right.
I tend to get along more with theists that grasp the concepts of evolution and at least accept, hey, we have viable evidence for it. If you can't see
Waves
that,
hand.
yeah, like if you can't see that, then it's like, all right, you're just either stupid or you're not an honest actor in this conversation, right? So,
by the way, I want to make a
talk
note.
all this shit about you that they want, Richard. Your ideas are no more outrageous than theirs, and I would actually maintain that your ideas are a little more rational than the Christians who have really no rationality to their God beliefs. That's one thing that I like about Ali, and I like about a lot of the polytheists that I meet. They have rationality to their God beliefs, and they can accept science.
Well, we've also determined that Richard is a polytheist with a patron god. Like we determined that a few streams back.
I think
relatively
we
fair.
That conclusion. Yeah,
it's not perfect, but it's relatively fair. When I was on Atheist Edge with Matt Dillahunty, and he said to me, "Steelman, my position." I said right then and there, and I maintain it today. The best explanation that we can actually have a decent amount of evidence for at present is the evolutionary model, which, by the way, predates Darwin. But anyway, Darwin did a lot for it. And that's the best explanation we have for our existence right now. Okay. And I'm not saying that is not true. I'm saying it's going to be disproven later, but I'm saying that is the best we got.
And by the way, I just want to let people know in the chat we've got about a half an hour left, Naka, if you want to stick to our original hour and a half schedule. Any of you who have put up super chats?
You have something going on after this as well, don't you?
Yeah, I'm going to spend a little bit of time with Math Pig. Everybody jump on over there when we're done here after a smoke break, okay?
But I want to let anybody who puts up a super chat, I am copy pasting your guys' super chats and putting them over on the side here. So even if Naka doesn't put it up right away, everything is going to get read and asked at the end. So if you have questions for Richard, post them up in the super chat or tag me, and I will make sure that your questions do get answered, so long as they're at least somewhat fairly polite.
And that question goes to what we're talking about now. So I'll go ahead and throw it up. Stupid Horror Energy.
I was about to say, this is a great transition for that.
Yeah. Great supporter of the show. Always asking questions. Some more serious than others, which is what makes me laugh every time. So this one is a serious question. Both of our questions today have been very serious. Very good questions. What is God's origin story?
Well, as far as I can tell, what's being claimed by the one that I would call God is that he was made by another kind of being, and that he was born into slavery. But I don't know. I have this little part I'm about to say right here. I have to guess at. I guess he was just too cool, and they gave him his freedom. So he has no lineage. He has no mother. He has no father. He has no people. And he's what I could call the first Christ. So the story of Moses and or the Epic of Gilgamesh is a story of the beginning of God, where he admits that he was not the original thing.
All right, so he was not the original thing.
Right.
So he's not the demiurge then.
Yeah, he's not at the very beginning.
Oh, I don't see anywhere where he claims that. Only Christians claim that.
Oh, we are in big agreement there. Oh man, I'm like, every time they say that God exists out of time and space and created everything from nothing, I'm like, please show me in scripture where it says that.
I mean, take a look at the Hindu and how the lotus comes out of the belly button of a god, and there's a god that comes from that, and then that god has iterations, you know? And I think it's actually telling the same thing in the Bible. It's why he talks about slavery. So why is he so obsessed with this slavery thing? Well, I think it's because he was born into slavery, and he really feels strongly about slavery.
So not to get us off topic, but just to address this really quickly, Aaron Benton, if atheists and Christians come to agreement on beliefs, then there is major confusion going on. So let me dismiss that notion. I don't agree with a lot of what Richard says. I don't agree with most of what Richard says. What I do agree with about Richard is he's respectful as he's saying it, and he's actually here to have a real conversation. If you notice, when I go off on Christians, it's because I think they're being disingenuous. I will react to what I consider to be bad faith actors. If I think that you're coming here being legit with me and real with me, I'm going to give you that respect back. It's not about me believing what Richard is saying. It's about me having the respect to let him say it. Now, if you're a Christian coming in, just giving me a bunch of bullshit, trying to back me into a corner, trying to get me into traps, I'm going to rage at you. Standing for Truth, Matt Powell, all of you fuckers, you know? So, I mean, let this be evidence of that. Like, I'm not out to get theists. I'm here to have conversations. You have to come here to have a conversation to get that respect. And Richard does every single time.
Well, and for what it's worth, there's a lot that I don't agree with, like, at all as well. That's why I've been asking you so many very targeted questions. Like I've kind of had Richard's feet to the fire for half of this discussion with, between physics and, archaeology, anthropology, paleontology, etc. Like this is a respectful discussion, but this isn't a whole bunch of people like circle jerking over the same ideas.
It's not real light and fluffy here.
Exactly. The whole point of having Richard here for a one-on-one is because he has different ideas that require us to have these isolated areas to where we can really delve into his ideology instead of a room to where we're all going back and forth. He's here tonight, and he's going to be here in the future for these types of shows, so we can delve and really ask him questions, go at him hard. I don't think that I've sat here and said one time that I believe that we came from the stars, even though that Matt Powell famously says that I believe that, but I'm interested in why Richard thinks it, why, how he came to that conclusion. And I'm not going to sit here and bash him for that conclusion just because I might disagree with it. I actually find it more logical than, God put us here 6,000 years ago, I find it more logical. I'm sorry. But yeah, we can get back into the conversation.
As to the flesh of God, and I don't want to give him too much attention. I'm going to skip that. As to the flesh of God, it says several times things like God walked in the garden of the cool of the day. The difference between God and your statues is I can defend myself. I can eat. I can see. I can hear. If I was going to brag on myself and make myself look cool, I'd be like, I know logic. I know algebra. I wouldn't be saying I can eat. Why does he mention three low functioning things that are all physical when he talks about himself? Come on, guys. Let's get away from the doctrine. Drop your pride. Read the Bible the way it's written. You're going to come to a different conclusion.
Well, it is interesting. God becomes less and less material as the Bible goes along. Like this is something that if you read scripture, he walks through the garden, he has conversations. Like he's very physical in the earlier books of the Bible, and then he becomes more and more and more spiritual and has more and more people that do the bidding for him as time goes along. Like the Spirit of God doing this, that, and the other. He sends the angels at one point. So if you take scripture, and I'm just playing around with, taking a look at what I remember of when I've read, God goes from being very physical and very present to less and less so as time goes on, which I think is interesting. But this
It's also
idea
exactly
that
what I already said.
yeah, this idea that he is eternal and disembodied doesn't quite match up to the earliest parts of scripture. And even if you try to say that it was metaphorical or that God could just create himself a body, why would he do that?
Right. I have to agree with Christopher Hitchens. If God is non-corporeal, maybe it wasn't Christopher Hitchens, maybe it was someone quoting Christopher. Every time he puts his hand into reality, he should draw back an arm just dripping with physics. So I don't know where Christians get this disembodied mind thing, other than making the claim that God made the universe, thereby must have been outside of it. But that's not, I don't see him actually claiming that anywhere.
Yeah, and it's one of the things that just kind of shows me that Christians don't really understand their own ideology. So yeah, like God clearly walked with Adam and Eve in the garden, but not only that, God had a child. God sent
Yeah,
Gabriel,
you noticed, right?
God sent Gabriel down with his seed or whatever it was, and Mary had a child. If you're
now wait a minute. If
there
Jesus
has
can
to
be
be
the
some
line of the kings, he has
physicality
to
to
come
that,
from
right?
Joseph.
I don't know.
If Jesus is going to be the line of the kings, that comes through Joseph, which means Joseph was the sperm donor, not Gabriel.
I mean, everybody knows this is one of my favorite lines of conversation with Christians. But I'm not going to take that route with you because, like, you're a different type of Christian. So yeah. I mean, I think the Bible obviously shows that Joseph was the father of Jesus. So if you're going to argue that Jesus was the son of God, then you would have to argue that God somehow possessed Joseph while he was doing the deed. I mean, that would be my thought.
Yeah, it would require something like that, which personally, I hope and I pray to be possessed by my Father. And I try to listen to him whenever he suggests something. And either I have a really, really great imagination that tells me the truth that I didn't even know before I asked, or I'm actually having communication. So I hope to be possessed by God. And if you were ever possessed by God and spoke to someone from a foreign land, that's when you'd actually speak tongues. It certainly wouldn't be yabba dabba do.
Well, here's an interesting bit, though, Richard, and this is something that I'd like to propose for your consideration. I know that a lot of people could probably use this on polytheists to a certain extent, but it is something that is known about psychology. There's a lot of your mind that, for lack of a better term, thinks for you. And by this I mean there's a big chunk of your brain that processes information outside of your conscious awareness. Your internal narrator, the thing you think of as yourself, the conscious mind as you were. It is only a very tiny percentage of your brain overall. There is evidence that
very tiny.
Various pieces of like scientific literature that before your hand even moves and before you've had the conscious decision to move your hand, the part of your brain that sets up to move it fires off. So effectively, the decision to move is made before you actually realize that you have made that decision, and your conscious mind then catches up.
That's right. Now, how do you know that's not a suggestion from outside of you?
I mean, you don't, but you also don't necessarily know that these revelations may not be what the human brain is hardwired to do, which is to find a butt ton of correlations from a number of different things that you've seen throughout your life and create a narrative for you.
I get it. Okay. All right. So what is that little bitty part of the brain you referred to? What was that?
It's mostly the prefrontal cortex.
No, the little place of origination, not the processing centers.
The piece of your brain, it's one of the motor cortexes, I think, when, like, they were talking about one of the motor cortexes firing up before the prefrontal cortex or any of the other areas associated with thought did.
If I intersect the ruby between your forehead and the silver cord, I'm pointing right at it. It's also in the Bible. It's expressed as an almond. It looks like an almond. It's the pineal gland. In fact, under brain scans, when we look at the human being and we ask them to think of themselves, all of that goes to that part of the brain. And when they think about God, all of that goes to that part of the brain. So their perception of self and perception of God appears to be the same thing, which I would agree with, because the apostles don't have the Holy Spirit, that is understanding and full experience of their own spirit and its holiness. until they're already in heaven. That is, quote unquote, the upper room. That we are right now.
I'm curious what your
Let me
evidence that
finish,
the
though,
pineal
but-
gland is the seat of consciousness is.
Electricity. Brain maps. I mean, we've shown it. But the apostles don't even understand themselves, and they don't even understand their full spirit until they're already in heaven. I believe that the reason Satan doesn't come here and just take a laser beam and just chop us all down, just mow us down and kill us, is because there's nothing to gain by doing it. We don't have our spirits.
I'm kind of confused because, to my knowledge, the pineal gland is mostly there for producing hormones in your brain.
It does
like
that.
it's the seat of where melatonin is produced among a number of other different hormones, and may also
Right.
be where like the period and stuff is regulated. But I've never once heard of the idea that it's the seat of consciousness.
Yeah. Even if you even go to Michelangelo's Adam touching the hand of God, touching the fingertip of Adam in the top, I think it's the Sistine Chapel. And you look at that drawing of God with the red cape behind him. Take a look at that, and then do an overlay of a human brain in the top of their spinal cord sometime. Just for fun.
I would want to study this gland. I'm not going to pretend to know too much about it.
Well, from what I know, though, like most of what I've read puts the seat of consciousness, as much as a seat of consciousness can be established, fairly firmly in the prefrontal cortex. Like that's where most of the conscious decisions are made, and it's also the so-called logic center of the brain. It's the part of the brain that, to some degree or another, can override biological needs, though it's very, very difficult to do, and it's also the weakest part of the brain because it's the most evolutionarily recent.
Eliakai, would it be safe to say that I could compare what you just said and our observations? If I said a computer is the screen, because when I think of the computer, I think of the screen, and I do all the operations through the screen. To say the part that is doing the processing is the consciousness is the wrong thing to look at, and not even what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is when we think of God and we think of ourselves, and when those suggestions comes, the quote unquote the subconscious, not the conscious, not the processing center, the origination is what I'm talking about. That electrically it comes from a central point in and or around or in the pineal gland and distributes out from there and gets processed. And that is that 3 to 5 second delay that a person is having quote unquote thoughts they don't know. It's exactly what you just referred to.
You'd have to actually cite some sources on this, because I've never once heard anything like that about the pineal gland. Like the pineal gland, again, as far as I know, primarily regulates hormones. Like I've never seen any scientific literature whatsoever to suggest what you're saying. So I'm going to cite your sources on that one, please, because that's quite confusing
I'll work
to me.
toward doing that for you.
I think we've hit a part of the conversation that we often hit with Richard, which it literally means that we've got to ingest this new piece of information to Richard's beliefs that he's given us. Consider it, and then the next time we have Richard for a one-on-one, we're going to have to talk about this gland and go in deeper with this ideology. It's every single time Richard comes on, we get something new that I've got to process.
Well, when we look at brain scans, there's a central point of origin of these. To me, it looks like suggestions, and we pick something that's suggested. But if I were in accidental prayer, I'd expect it to look exactly like that.
Yeah, I can't. Next show is definitely going to have to be about this, because I'm in a part of the conversation now to where I'm like, I am lost. Ali, you're not so lost. So you can continue to combat this for a little while, but remember, we got 14 minutes, and I know Richard.
We better get to the questions then.
Yeah, before you go, after the stream, I would like to do a small recording for Patreon. I want to start to do that tonight. Maybe just ask you a couple questions you can answer real quick, and then you can go.
Happy to.
But I'm going to start doing that for my Patreon. That'll be Patreon content every month that only patrons will get. A couple questions after each show of the guests. So there's not really too many questions. I've already shown most. So we can continue talking right up until about 5 minutes till, and we'll close, or 10:25 and we'll close out.
Yeah, and like at this point though, unless I can actually see the evidence that Richard has for this, we're just gonna be flailing back and forth. Yes, it is. No, it isn't. Because like the evidence that I have seen and the research that I have seen, which neurobiology was not my specialty at all in college, but I did learn enough about it to know that I've never once heard the pineal gland ever proposed as being the center of consciousness or any of the sorts of like spread patterns that you were talking about.
Not consciousness. I never did say that. You're the only one that said that. I never said it's the center of consciousness. I never said that. What I said is when we think about God or we think about ourselves, the same part of the brain lights up, which is in the central location that is near or in the pineal gland, and all of the electricity that goes into the consciousness, into the processing centers, originates there. And there can be activity there for 3 to 5 seconds before the person realizes it. And that's exactly what you referred to when you said, oh, the brain does this for whatever amount of time and a person doesn't even know they're thinking. It's exactly go look at what you just said.
Do you know the physiological process of how neuron firing works?
I have no idea at all.
Okay,
yeah, I think that our next show with Richard will be about this, so we can really study up on it and have some good questions.
It's fair to say cite sources, Richard. That's totally fair. I don't have anything prepared, but I couldn't, of course, have absolutely everything prepared that you might ask me, and you guys got to lead the conversation.
Yeah, MathPig says it's a 2 millisecond delay, and that's probably closer. Like, this is me not reading off of the study. This was me recalling one, so I could have gotten the direct actual numbers incorrect. So thank you for correcting MathPig.
I will cite my sources as far as the original statement that I quoted, and that's T.J. Tuttle of Atheist Edge.
We do have a question from AR for you. He says, or she says, unironically, what does Richard think about DMT and the pineal gland?
And now, from what I understand, DMT was that drug they developed to help people in their marriages, but now people feel really like in touch when they use it, like recreationally or otherwise, right? That's
well,
DMT.
There seems to be some shared hallucinations when it comes to DMT. I'm not too familiar with it. I've never tried it. Never been interested in trying it.
I think AR is going to have to educate me before I can answer the question. I'm sorry, I'm only 7 years old, and I've never participated in that world. I don't know much.
Yeah, I think that that's something that I've heard a little bit about. I know that there's some shared experiences that people have on DMT. I'd like to look into that. AR, we can talk about that.
All I know is that if you look at Solomon's Temple, it's a description of outer space and the connection between God and any one of us. And it's describing telepathy. It's describing the pineal gland centered in the center of the brain using the imagery of an almond and a pomegranate. That is, the pomegranate represents the whole head, and then the almond represents the pineal gland.
So we've had a number of people ask in the chat for you to clarify what you mean by you're only 7 years old.
Oh, when I was 42 is when I had a waking dream without any kind of hallucinogenic drug use in my life. I smoked pot a handful of times, but it wasn't laced. But I've never done hallucinogens. I had what I can only call a dream while I was awake, and it showed me things that are true and falsifiable in reality. And it was an interpretation of the story of David and Goliath. I immediately said it must be wrong. I immediately went to a computer while my memory was still very fresh. And in less than 20 minutes, I had found every aspect of the story of David and Goliath in physical reality way before science found it, proving myself wrong. I mean, I wanted to be right, but I was wrong.
All right, so Nephilim Free is challenging you to a moderated debate. Probably on his channel.
He's been doing that all day. I would love to have a debate with a person, anyone, including him. But I'm not going to put up with what he did to me while we were having a conversation where he just gallops a bunch of tangents until everyone can't even keep track of what he's talking about. I'm not playing that game again.
Yeah,
and that's what he always does.
And I find it odd that he only wants people to come on his channel.
Well,
Step
he wants
outside your
your
zone.
popularity.
Yeah.
That's what he wants. He wants you to come on his channel so he can gain some of your popularity. It's theft.
Yeah. Nephilim. So yeah, Richard answered you. I posed it for you.
He's my brother, and I love him. I'm sure he's going to be fine. I'm sure he's going to make it to heaven. I'm really convinced of that.
He's got a hard on for you.
Yeah, I noticed. Well, if he really dislikes me and really disagrees with me, he should stop giving me free advertisement.
It means you're doing it right, Richard.
That's what I think.
If you can draw the ire of Christians, like I draw the ire of Christians, I think that you're doing what you're trying to do exactly 100% right.
I think I'm doing it right. When Praise I Am That I Am says that you and I and Dr. Josh and Skylar are in cahoots, and that I'm actually an atheist, and that you guys are probably paying me, I think I'm saying it right.
I got to see that. Oh gosh. Yeah. You're one of my atheist homeboys, and we just staged this whole thing.
Oh yeah.
That's why I'm sitting here like I'm so perplexed. I gotta spend another 2 weeks thinking about what Richard just said before I can talk to him.
We agreed on all this stuff ahead of time, Knock. I don't know why you can't remember what we agreed upon.
Yeah, it's because I'm a drunk.
Actually, you want to know something interesting, Knock? If Nephilim wants to debate Richard with a moderator so bad, do you want to invite them both onto the channel to have the debate here, and you and I can stay out of it and let them have it out unless they start gish galloping or talking over each other?
Yeah, I mean the invitation's open, but I doubt Neffy would come here. I think Neffy wants Richard to go to his channel. But yeah, that would.
If Neffy's willing to come here, I can be as neutral a moderator as humanly possible. Knock and I will stay out of the conversation with the exception of just stepping in. I have done it for Knock before when he got ganged up on by the other Christians. So
I can, in fact, probably keep myself out of the room all together and still run it. Because
I would only ask equal time. Just give me equal time. That's all I ask.
Well, Richard, you've seen how I moderate these sorts of things. I made sure that everyone got to talk, and this would just be two people. So if Nephilim agrees to come onto this channel and have me moderate, I
tell you what, I'll do a structured debate against Nephilim free, and I will wear a blindfold the whole time so I'm not going off a script. I will put sand in my eyes and put a blindfold on.
Yeah. Neffy never shows his face, as far as I know, so he wouldn't make that promise. So yeah, that's out there. I'd be willing to do that. Like I said, I'd keep myself off of the screen if I can, so it would just be the two of you and the moderator, and I would just run StreamYard and listen in as we do it. So yeah, Neffy, if you want to do that, Richard is more than willing, as you heard. So, but yeah, we got about 5 minutes, so. I think we should probably start closing out. Let Richard plug his channel. Talk about the streams you've had recently. Richard's been doing a lot of good work. He's had a lot of good conversations. I did get to watch his stream with Jesus is Lord and Sky out today, and they were both great conversations. I'm proud of you, dude. I think that's what your channel needs, and it'll start growing. So go subscribe to Richard.
And for what it's worth, to answer some, comments that are being made in the chat, as far as quote unquote moderation, most of my job on this, we've never actually had a formal debate on here. The closest we ever came was with Naka versus The Room. And in that, I did not step in at all, except to allow other people to speak when they hadn't gotten a chance to speak, for long periods of time. Yeah. In terms of moderation, quote unquote, what I've done is just keep the peace.
Yeah, I encourage Ali, when it's a room setting or when it's something like this, I encourage both Ali and John to be more interactive than just moderators. So play that moderator role, but also be part of the conversation. Ali is brilliant. It'd be stupid of me not to utilize her in that way. But yeah, in a debate format, when I've asked her to take a lesser role and just play that moderator, she did it brilliantly, and all you have to do is go and watch that Knock versus The Room to see that.
Yeah. Okay, so John Peterson called me the Jill Whisperer. And I thought that was really cute. He's a very witty guy.
So, for what it's worth, Nephilim, as far as the timing things, if you want to come on here, Nock will stay out of the debate, and so will I. I'll just make sure you guys get equal time to speak, and I'll make sure that if, one or the other of you wants to respond to something that the other said, that they get the opportunity to do so. Like, in terms of moderation, I used to actually moderate real college debates. That's one of the reasons that Naka picked me. So, like, if you want to come on here, I will do that for you.
Yeah, we'll make it happen. And Neffy's like a moderator's role is to keep time. We'll keep time for you, dog. I mean, whatever format you want, we'll do it. We'll set it up.
I think he's gotten enough attention. This thing,
but yeah.
I mean, the show's.
I don't think he's gonna accept. I mean, I'm just gonna put that out there. I think he's scared. But we'll see. But yeah, go ahead and plug your channel because we got 2 minutes, and we're gonna roll out of here and do something real quick for Patreon before we
Right on. Okay, I'll keep this short. I know what I'm saying is super, super weird, guys, but I can back up all of it and in reality without ignoring things that are well established as scientific law. Okay? It works throughout the text. In fact, it interlocks all the texts. And there's been some people that are pretty popular in this community have noticed it. I've had great conversations with Dragnot, Skyout, Jill. And it went really well. And it's not even the Jill and it's not even the Skyout that we had awesome conversations. We both parted on good terms and had a great time. And very, very soon, whenever the man can stretch 3 minutes together, Dr. Joshua Bowen has offered to come on to the channel. And he and I have a one-on-one discussion, as it's been more than one person has asked us if we would do that. That's it. I'm done plugging it. It's called Demolish Doctrine.
All right. And yeah, Nephilim Free has accepted. I'm going to write your email down, Nephilim Free, and I will send you an email. We'll work out the time and the date. But go ahead, Ali.
Yeah, so Neffy, it sounds like Nock will be in contact with you, and we can get that all set up. As I said, I'll keep time, and I will try to be as fair as I possibly can for you guys. But I'd be really interested to see that debate, and it sounds like Richard feels as though if there's a fair moderator that he will get that opportunity. We'll arrange what the parameters are around the structured debate, like how long each of you gets for opening statements, how long each of you gets for responses, and things of that nature. But we can get that set up for a more formal setting, even than, say, modern day debate often has, and get that all, squared away. So make sure that you propose what the topic you specifically want is so that we can get that all set up. And yeah, I look forward to having both of you on.
Whatever Neffy wants is fine for me, as long as it's biblical.
And this is a good opportunity to promote this new aspect of the show, because I've actually been thinking about doing this if the opportunity arises. So if people would like to have a structured debate on my channel, I'm more than willing to do so. Don't know what I'm here, but we would have to schedule it well in advance, and it would probably take the place of my weekly show. But that is something that I'm interested in doing. I've had a couple people reach out tentatively to see if my channel would be a place they could do that, considering that I do have moderators here. So yeah, that is an aspect of the show that we will be having sometimes, but not regularly. And if you're interested, email me at theragingatheist@gmail.com. ragingatheist@gmail.com. As people like to say, I'm the ghetto atheist, so I embrace that. So we can set up a debate.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, don't forget to express yourself. Few venues in life are free, and you get to express yourself. Dislike this video or like this video, but subscribe. I think Nock's a great guy. He's obviously trying to be honest. And if you want to see real conversations between someone who's agnostic and or atheist and someone who's a theist of several different shades and colors, come watch. Subscribe to Nakasuchi, please.
Thank you so much, Richard. And with that, we are going to get out of here. Yeah, Richard, like maybe 5 minutes after, just a couple questions. And then I'll get that up on Patreon tomorrow or the next day. So if you're a patron member, yeah, you'll have access to that. No link for Patreon in this description. I will put one in the description following the show, and I'll get Richard's description in there before the next show. The next show is at 1 a.m. Eastern. And that'll be That Christian Vlogger. We're going to talk about forgiveness and a specific instance of forgiveness. And then maybe have some discussion after that. I want to go for about an hour and then get my ass to bed. So, yeah, I will see you guys at 1 o'clock. We'll see you soon.